The red light goes on. The signal goes out live. And in seconds, millions of viewers become witnesses to unthinkable horror. These aren't scripted scenes or special effects. They're real moments when live television captured humanity's darkest hours, broadcasting tragedy directly into homes around the world, with no way to look away. It was May 23, 2016, when 34-year-old Cameron Blake positioned his mobile broadcasting unit along a desolate stretch of highway outside Moore, Oklahoma. Cameron worked as a meteorologist for a regional news station, known for his fearless storm coverage and ability to make complex weather patterns understandable to viewers. His childhood experience surviving a tornado drove his obsession with understanding these violent storms. Beside him sat 28-year-old Peter Webb, his camera operator, who had voiced concerns about their proximity to the developing supercell. Peter was cautious by nature, but he trusted Cameron's experience and deferred to his judgment, even as the radar showed the storm intensifying at an alarming rate. The afternoon sky had turned an ominous shade of green-gray. Cameron had positioned their modified SUV facing east to capture the storm's approach, explaining the rotation patterns to viewers watching at home. Among those viewers was his wife Jennifer, 7 months pregnant with their first child. The tornado touched down approximately 1 mile southwest of their position, appearing as a dark wedge-shaped column. Cameron's voice remained steady as he narrated the touchdown for nearly 15 seconds, his professional instinct overriding everything else. The funnel moved northeast at 35 miles per hour, closing the distance rapidly. Debris began pelting the vehicle, branches, gravel, and roofing material creating violent hammering sounds. Peter shouted that they needed to leave immediately, but Cameron continued broadcasting. The tornado's outer circulation reached them, and the SUV began rocking violently as gusts likely pushed 120 to 130 miles per hour near the vehicle. Hail and small debris hammered the glass. A broken 2x4 stud, roughly 4 feet long, punched through the driver's side window at an estimated 100 to 120 miles per hour. The tempered glass exploded into pellets. The board fragmented on the window frame, and the leading segment struck Cameron's left temple, causing a depressed skull fracture with bone driven into the brain. A second shard of aluminum siding scissored through the windshield and tore across his right clavicle, likely lacerating the subclavian artery. Bright arterial bleeding pooled across the seat within seconds. Peter managed to accelerate away from the tornado's path, screaming Cameron's name. The mounted camera, streaked with blood and debris, continued recording, its distorted footage catching only fragments of what happened inside the vehicle. Cameron's breathing became irregular and gasping, indicating severe brain trauma and imminent death. Peter drove for approximately 2 minutes before pulling over, pressing his jacket against Cameron's shoulder wound. But the damage was catastrophic. Blood had soaked through Cameron's clothing and pooled on the floor. His face had turned pale gray, his lips blue. The irregular gasping breaths came further apart, then stopped entirely. Peter felt for a pulse but found nothing. The live feed continued transmitting until the station finally cut to the studio. The tornado had deposited debris across the main highway, blocking emergency routes. Responders reached the location nearly 20 minutes later and pronounced Cameron dead at the scene from massive head trauma and blood loss. The station faced immediate backlash for not cutting the feed sooner. Peter resigned 3 weeks later. 11 weeks after his death, Jennifer delivered their daughter, Sophia, at full term and filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the station. It was November 8, 2017, when 41-year-old Lydia Grant arrived at a local television studio in Toronto for what should have been a routine cooking segment. Lydia was a culinary instructor who had been teaching French cuisine for years and making occasional appearances on a small regional lifestyle program that aired weekday mornings to a modest local audience. She had never experienced a serious incident on set before. She was known for her warm personality and expertise in classic techniques requiring open flame preparation. That morning, she wore a flowing silk blend blouse in burgundy paired with her chef's apron and her signature pearl necklace. a gift from her late mother. The segment focused on preparing crêpes Suzette, a classic French dessert requiring tableside flambé with Grand Marnier liqueur. Producers had debated cutting the flambé portion due to safety concerns, but Lydia insisted it was her signature. The live segment began with Lydia preparing orange butter sauce in a copper pan. She added approximately 4 ounces of Grand Marnier to the hot pan and tilted it toward the gas flame to ignite the alcohol vapors. The alcohol ignited as expected, thin blue flames flickering across the sauce. Lydia reached for a serving plate while holding the flaming pan, turning slightly away from the camera. Her silk blend blouse sleeve, which had come unbuttoned at the cuff, draped forward and made contact with the flames. It ignited instantly, flames racing up her right sleeve from wrist to shoulder in approximately 2 seconds as the fabric fused and burned against her skin. Lydia gasped and dropped the copper pan, which spilled flaming liquid across the kitchen island. She instinctively began batting at the flames with her left hand, which caused the fire to spread to her left sleeve as well. Derek rushed toward her with a kitchen towel but hesitated, unsure how to help. Flames reached Lydia's hair, which had been styled with aerosol hairspray 90 minutes earlier. Her hair ignited in a sudden flash, flames spreading across her scalp and down to her face and neck. Her initial screams turned to choking, gasping sounds as the heat seared her airways and burned her facial skin. She stumbled backward and fell sideways onto the studio floor. Derek threw the towel over her upper body, but the towel itself caught fire from the intensity of the burning synthetic fabric. James grabbed a fire extinguisher but fumbled with the safety pin. By the time he deployed the extinguisher, Lydia had sustained 2nd and 3rd degree burns across approximately 38% of her body, including her face, scalp, neck, both arms, and upper chest. Lydia remained conscious, making hoarse sounds as she struggled to breathe. The burned skin on her face had begun sloughing off, and her airways were rapidly swelling from thermal injury. Paramedics arrived and recognized the severity of her airway burns. Her breathing had become labored and wheezing. They performed an emergency intubation in the studio to secure her airway before transport. While beginning fluid resuscitation, she was transported to the regional burn center in critical condition with dropping blood pressure and signs of shock. Lydia Grant died that afternoon from complications of severe burn injuries, including respiratory failure and cardiac arrest. The network immediately suspended all cooking segments involving open flame. Derek required psychological counseling and took a 3-month leave. Though the station never released the footage, a short off-screen recording briefly circulated in local culinary circles online before being removed. It was September 22, 2019, when 47-year-old Dominic Hayes arrived at the Riverside Tower construction site in Portland, Oregon, to conduct a safety inspection for the city's building department. Dominic was a Canadian structural inspector contracted under an international peer review compliance agreement, with years of experience evaluating high-rise projects across North America. Known for his meticulous attention to detail, he was specifically requested to assess the tower's steel framework before the next phase of construction could proceed. The Riverside Tower was a 40-story mixed-use building that had reached the 28th floor when concerns arose about welding quality in the steel beam connections. Dominic had reviewed contractor reports showing some irregularities, but had been told by the construction foreman that all critical joints had been re-inspected and certified safe for his walkthrough. His colleague Sarah had questioned the timing of the inspection, but Dominic trusted the contractor's assurances. The inspection team included project manager Lisa Rodriguez, safety coordinator Jake Morrison, and a building department photographer. The assessment required Dominic to examine beam connections on the 28th floor while documenting any visible defects in the steel framework. The inspection began with Dominic positioned near the building's northeast corner, explaining proper welding techniques while moving systematically along the exposed steel beams. A sudden metallic shift rang through the steel frame. Not a clean ping, but the deep scraping sound of a connection slipping under load. At the time, the inspection team assumed it was just thermal movement in the beams, a common sound on unfinished floors, and no one recognized it as the onset of structural failure. Investigators later determined that the noise originated from a critical load-bearing joint, where substandard welding had left a hidden flaw. Once the connection slipped, the compromised weld fractured instantly under stress. Within moments, the failure spread to adjacent connections, causing a localized collapse limited to the northeast corner between the 28th and 26th floors. The drop halted when the load was redistributed across lateral bracing and intact crossbeams, preventing full progressive collapse of the tower. The floor began sagging toward the center. Dominic lost his footing as the steel decking buckled beneath him. A primary support beam twisted and separated from its connection, and the entire northeast section of the 28th floor gave way. The floor section dropped in a pancaking motion, with Dominic falling through the failing structure. He dropped approximately 15 feet through twisted steel and debris before his body struck a horizontal I-beam at roughly 20 miles per hour. The impact broke his right arm, several ribs, and caused internal bleeding, but he remained alert and tried to grab onto the beam as the collapse continued. The partial floor failure extended downward through 2 additional levels before stabilizing, sending debris and structural members cascading through the open framework. As his body fell through the dust and twisted steel, the site's documentation drone, hovering in a fixed survey position, only caught a brief, obscured glimpse of movement before losing visual in the debris cloud. Dominic's body struck a concrete foundation wall at ground level at an estimated 45 miles per hour. His descent had been partially slowed by secondary impacts and structural interference during the collapse, preventing a full free-fall acceleration. The impact dislocated his shoulder and fractured his collarbone, while his torso compressed against the wall, causing severe internal injuries, including a punctured lung and damaged spleen. He sustained catastrophic internal injuries and was likely killed on impact. The collapsed floor section crashed down seconds afterward, burying much of the area in twisted steel and concrete debris. The drone, still hovering in its fixed survey position, passively recorded the aftermath. In the wide-angle feed, Dominic's body could be seen partially visible among the wreckage. Emergency responders needed over an hour to safely navigate the unstable debris field. Dominic Hayes was pronounced dead at the scene, along with 3 construction workers. It was November 23, 2017, when 29-year-old Phoebe Larson arrived at the staging area for Philadelphia's annual Thanksgiving parade. Phoebe worked full-time as an event coordinator, but volunteered her expertise to the parade committee each year as a passion project. Known for her infectious enthusiasm and organizational skills, she had participated in the parade for 6 consecutive years and had been promoted to lead handler for one of the parade's largest character balloons. The balloon was a 52-foot-tall cartoon character, requiring a team of 24 handlers using guide ropes to control its movement. Weather conditions that morning included sustained winds of 22 miles per hour, with gusts up to 34 miles per hour, approaching the parade's safety threshold. Parade officials had debated canceling the balloon portion, but decided to proceed with enhanced safety protocols. Phoebe had attended an early morning safety briefing, where handlers were instructed to immediately release ropes if wind conditions became dangerous. Her position was as lead handler on the front left guide rope, responsible for coordinating the team's movements. Her parents, visiting from Minnesota, were watching from the bleachers approximately 1 mile into the parade route. As Phoebe's balloon team approached the intersection of Market Street and 16th Street, wind speed suddenly increased. The balloon, which had been floating at a stable 15-foot altitude, suddenly lifted to nearly 30 feet as a gust caught its broad surface area. Phoebe immediately radioed parade control to report the dangerous conditions. A second, stronger gust, estimated at 43 miles per hour, struck the balloon from the west, causing it to tilt dramatically eastward and rise another 20 feet. The sudden upward force lifted 3 handlers on the eastern side completely off their feet. Phoebe shouted to her team to hold steady while the balloon continued rising. The balloon reached approximately 65 feet in altitude, and the guide ropes were at maximum tension. The front left rope that Phoebe was gripping suddenly snapped at a connection point near the balloon. The severed rope, still under extreme tension, recoiled violently downward and backward, the frayed end traveling at approximately 70 miles per hour. The rope struck Phoebe across her face and neck, the impact fracturing her jaw, shattering her left cheekbone, and crushing her larynx. She was thrown backward approximately 6 feet by the force of the impact, landing on her back on the asphalt parade route, with her head striking the ground. The impact with the ground caused a basilar skull fracture and immediate loss of consciousness. Blood began flowing from her nose, mouth, and left ear, classic signs of severe head trauma, while her body exhibited rigid posturing with arms and legs extended. Parade officials immediately halted the procession, and emergency medical personnel rushed to Phoebe's location. She was found unresponsive with irregular breathing and a weak pulse. Her pupils were unequal, the left dilated and non-reactive, the right constricted, indicating severe brain injury and increased intracranial pressure. Paramedics established an airway and began ventilation while preparing for immediate transport to the nearest trauma center. Her parents, who had witnessed the accident from the bleachers, were restrained by security as they attempted to reach her. Phoebe was transported to the trauma center, where emergency scans revealed massive intracranial hemorrhaging and severe brain swelling. Phoebe Larson was pronounced dead that afternoon after neurological testing confirmed complete cessation of brain activity. The parade was immediately canceled, and all balloon portions of future parades were suspended. Investigation revealed that the rope had been in service for 7 years, 2 years beyond its recommended replacement schedule. Her parents filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the parade organizers. The incident prompted multiple cities to revise their parade balloon safety guidelines, updating wind limits and equipment replacement schedules. It was February 16, 2015, when 38-year-old Grant Nichols arrived at the demolition site in Dallas, Texas, for what should have been the culmination of 6 weeks of meticulous planning. Grant was a demolition engineer and explosives expert who had overseen 67 successful building demolitions during his 14-year career. He specialized in urban demolitions requiring precise explosive placement to ensure structures collapsed inward without damaging surrounding buildings. Known for his methodical approach, Grant had earned a reputation as one of the most reliable demolition specialists in the Southwest. The project involved demolishing an 11-story office building that had been vacant for 3 years. Grant had spent 6 weeks planning the demolition, placing 847 individual explosive charges at strategic points throughout the building's support structure. The demolition was scheduled for Sunday morning to minimize traffic and ensure maximum safety. A 500-meter safety perimeter had been established, with police blocking roads and evacuating nearby buildings. Local news stations had been invited to broadcast the demolition live. Grant's observation position was in a reinforced command trailer located 550 meters south of the building. His wife, Rebecca, and their 8-year-old son, Tyle, were watching the broadcast from home. Grant performed his final safety check and initiated the firing sequence. The first series of explosions detonated on the building's ground floor as planned. The building's south side began collapsing inward as dust clouds billowed outward. An anomaly occurred. The building's north side failed to collapse as programmed, remaining partially standing while the south side fell. This created an unbalanced load that caused the remaining north structure to tilt southward rather than collapsing straight down. Grant immediately recognized the failure and shouted for everyone to move back. The tilting north section, approximately 6 stories of concrete and steel, weighing an estimated 2,400 tons, began falling southward like a toppling tree. The structure fell outside the planned collapse zone, aimed directly toward the safety perimeter, where emergency vehicles were positioned. Grant, realizing the danger to personnel, made the decision to leave the command trailer and run toward the perimeter to warn people. He exited the trailer and began sprinting north, waving his arms. The collapsing north section struck the ground approximately 480 meters from the original building footprint. The impact sent a pressure wave through the debris field, hurling concrete fragments and steel sections outward. A 12-foot length of number 11 rebar, weighing roughly 60 pounds, was launched by the force and struck Grant from behind while he was still running toward the perimeter. The bar hit across his upper back and neck at an estimated 30 miles per hour, severing his spinal cord at the C3 vertebra and fracturing his skull. Although the injury caused instantaneous loss of motor control, the remaining forward momentum carried his body several feet. Grant was thrown forward roughly 10 feet, his body tumbling across the ground before coming to rest face down. Television cameras had inadvertently captured Grant's final moments. Emergency personnel reached Grant, finding him unresponsive with no pulse. His neck was visibly deformed, and blood was flowing from his nose and ears. Paramedics began CPR, despite the obvious severity of his injuries. Grant Nichols was pronounced dead at the scene from a traumatic spinal cord transection and severe head trauma. The inquiry uncovered that a trio of demolition charges malfunctioned because of defective electrical connections, resulting in an uneven structural failure. The contracting firm faced legal liability proceedings and contract termination, which ultimately led to its insolvency. The incident led to updated demolition protocols, including mandatory secondary detonation verification checks before final firing sequences. It was July 9, 2016, when 33-year-old Jetta Howard arrived at the base camp in Chamonix, French Alps, for what should have been a routine mountain rescue operation. Jetta was a Norwegian mountain rescue specialist and paramedic who had been working in alpine rescue operations for 9 years. Known for her technical climbing skills and calm demeanor during high-stress operations, she had successfully participated in over 200 mountain rescues. The rescue operation involved extracting an injured climber from a steep rock face at approximately 11,150 feet elevation on Mont Blanc. A documentary crew had been filming a series about mountain rescue operations and had been granted live relay access for a regional alpine emergency broadcast, with helicopter footage transmitted in real time to local television affiliates. The injured climber, a German tourist, had fallen approximately 30 feet and sustained a compound leg fracture requiring immediate helicopter extraction. Weather conditions were marginal for helicopter operations, with gusty winds averaging 25 miles per hour and occasional stronger gusts. Jetta had been selected as the rescue specialist to be lowered from the helicopter due to her experience with technical extractions. The helicopter pilot was a French aviator with 22 years of alpine flying experience. The helicopter departed with Jetta secured in a rescue harness connected to a 100-foot steel cable winch system. The helicopter reached the injured climber's position and began hovering approximately 80 feet above the rock face. Jetta was lowered from the helicopter while carrying medical equipment and a rescue litter. She reached the injured climber and began assessing his injuries while communicating with the helicopter crew via radio. While Jetta was securing the climber into the rescue litter, a sudden wind gust estimated at 40 miles per hour struck the helicopter from the west. The helicopter was pushed approximately 50 feet eastward, causing the cable to swing dramatically. A second, stronger gust struck the helicopter, causing it to drop approximately 30 feet suddenly. The sudden descent created slack in the cable, which then snapped taut again, creating a violent whipping motion. Jetta was caught off balance and lost her grip on the rock face. The helicopter was struck by a third gust, an updraft that lifted the aircraft suddenly upward approximately 40 feet. The rapid ascent put extreme tension on the cable system, which was rated for 2,000 pounds but was now supporting dynamic loading. The cable attachment point on Jetta's harness, a carabiner that had been in service for 4 years, failed under the stress. Investigators later determined that the violent swing had side-loaded the gate, twisting it out of alignment. The carabiner gate broke open under the load, and Jetta separated from the cable, beginning an immediate free fall from approximately 95 feet above the rock face. Her body fell for approximately 2.1 seconds, rotating backward as she dropped. She struck a sloping rock face at approximately 52 miles per hour, impacting primarily on her back and left side. The initial impact fractured her spine at T7 and T8 vertebrae. shattered her left shoulder blade, and broke 4 ribs. Her body bounced off the sloping rock and continued falling, tumbling through the air for another 40 feet before striking a second, more vertical rock face. The second impact occurred head first, crushing her helmet and fracturing her skull in multiple places, with bone fragments driven into her brain tissue. She bounced again and fell another 60 feet, her body now limp, before striking a narrow ledge. The final impact broke both legs, her pelvis, and her right arm. She came to rest approximately 195 feet below her initial position. The entire fall was captured by both the helicopter-mounted camera and a fixed base camp relay feed. The footage was still transmitting live when the fall occurred, giving viewers only a few seconds of the incident before the broadcast was abruptly cut from the control room. The injured climber witnessed the fall directly from his position in the rescue litter. A second rescue team reached Yetta's position, finding her unresponsive with massive trauma. Yetta Howard was pronounced dead at the scene from multiple traumatic injuries incompatible with life. Investigation revealed the carabiner failure was due to metal fatigue from repeated loading cycles, leading to new equipment replacement protocols. The injured climber survived but required extensive psychological treatment. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now. Acting out, yelling at employees, making unreasonable demands, flouting the rules, is often a show of false power, but reality doesn't care about volume. In this video, we cover 6 Karens who got instant karma, each showing how cruelty and arrogance eventually meet a hard stop. It was May 14, 2018, in Phoenix, Arizona. The heat clung to the pavement outside a suburban grocery store, where shoppers moved quickly to their cars, shielding their eyes from the late afternoon glare. In the loading zone, a scene that started as irritation would escalate into a fatal accident, one that left bystanders shaken but unsurprised given the behavior of the woman at its center. Liz Thompson was 52 years old, known in her neighborhood for her temper and also for her size. At well over 200 pounds, her frame made movements slower and falls harder to recover from. She was not a professional under pressure, nor someone navigating complex risks. Instead, her daily life revolved around small errands, often punctuated by outbursts. Cashiers and clerks knew her as the customer who demanded managers over minor inconveniences. Neighbors avoided her driveway, recalling how she once screamed at a teenager for bagging groceries too slowly. Confrontation had become her identity, and she treated conflict as a way of asserting control. Rules, signs, and courtesies were simply obstacles she refused to acknowledge. The technical setting that day was ordinary, but unforgiving. Grocery store loading zones are designed for trucks to back slowly into designated spaces, guided by mirrors and sometimes spotters. Drivers rely on pedestrians to keep clear of these large vehicles, as blind spots make anything directly behind the truck invisible. Even at low speeds, a semi-trailer weighing several tons cannot stop instantly once rolling. Liz had pulled her SUV into the loading zone, blocking the space reserved for a delivery truck scheduled to arrive. When the driver honked, she refused to move. She stepped out, slamming her cart into the side of the truck while shouting insults. Witnesses later described her as red-faced, gesturing wildly, clearly determined to escalate instead of yielding. The driver, attempting to complete his delivery, inched the truck backward toward the dock. Store employees shouted for Liz to step aside, but she pushed her cart closer to the truck's path, treating the slow roll of the vehicle as another chance to prove a point. By this stage, the danger was obvious. Bystanders waved and called out, but Liz ignored them. She shoved her cart forward, then turned abruptly and caught her foot on the curb. The stumble was small but decisive. Her size made it impossible to recover balance once her weight shifted. She fell heavily onto the asphalt, directly behind the truck's reversing wheels. Her shopping spilled across the pavement as her body slipped into the blind spot. The truck's rear wheels rolled over her before the driver realized anything had happened. Screams erupted from shoppers and several ran forward, waving their arms. The driver slammed the brakes, jumping out to see what had occurred. The scene was immediate and gruesome, with no possibility of survival. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but paramedics could only confirm what was already clear. Liz had been killed instantly by crushing injuries. Surveillance footage reviewed later showed the sequence without ambiguity. Every step, from her blocking the zone, to the cart slamming, to her fall, was documented. Witnesses told investigators that warnings had been shouted repeatedly, but she had chosen to ignore them. The driver, moving cautiously and within regulations, had no way of knowing she had gone to the ground behind him. The Phoenix Police Department cleared the truck driver of all fault. Their report emphasized that the death was entirely preventable and resulted from pedestrian interference in a restricted area. The grocery store later installed additional signage and barriers, though staff admitted the measures were meant more to protect drivers from confrontations than to prevent another accident like Liz Thompson's. It was March 8, 2017, in Dallas, Texas. The dinner rush had just begun at a mid-range steakhouse, where the clatter of dishes and chatter of customers blended into routine noise. The atmosphere seemed unremarkable, yet within an hour, an accident would unfold, one that left bystanders shaken, but not altogether shocked, given the reputation of the woman involved. Barbara Ellis was 46 years old and well known in that establishment for her behavior. She worked a low-level office job nearby, but her self-image was that of someone who deserved more recognition than she ever received. Dining out had become her stage, and she frequently berated servers to reassert control. Her family mentioned that she once humiliated a young waiter to the point of tears over a glass of iced tea she claimed had too much ice. The restaurant environment itself was straightforward. Commercial kitchens are tightly organized spaces with slick tile floors, hot surfaces, and fryers filled with oil heated to nearly 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Staff are trained to move in coordinated patterns to avoid collisions. Customers are barred from entering these areas, not only because of food safety, but because a single slip or misstep can cause serious injury. That evening, she had been seated for less than 15 minutes when her agitation began. She complained loudly about the pace of service, despite her order being taken within standard time. When her drink refill did not arrive instantly, she pushed her chair back with a loud scrape and began yelling at the nearest server. Staff tried to calm her, assuring her that food was being prepared, but she continued shouting, waving her arms. Several diners turned in their seats to watch. Her outburst escalated when she stood and marched toward the service counter, pushing past a young hostess who told her firmly that customers were not allowed behind it. Barbara sneered and stepped through the swing door into the kitchen, declaring she would get it herself. Employees shouted for her to stop, but she advanced further. The kitchen had just been mopped in one area to clear up spilled water near the fry station. Staff knew it was slick, but Barbara moved forward with no caution. Within seconds, the predictable happened. Her heel slid on the wet patch, and her body whipped backward before snapping forward. She struck her temple on the sharp edge of a stainless steel counter with an audible crack that several witnesses later described. She collapsed sideways, her upper body striking the fryer station. A burst of superheated oil splashed out, searing her face, neck, and shoulders. The burns were immediate and severe. Kitchen staff reacted instantly, pulling her away and shutting down equipment, but she was already unresponsive. Customers in the dining room saw the commotion and the smoke of splattered oil rising. Emergency services were called, arriving within minutes. Paramedics attempted resuscitation, but she was gravely injured from both head trauma and extensive burns. She was transported to a nearby hospital, where doctors worked briefly before declaring her dead. The extent of her injuries left no realistic chance of survival. The aftermath was chaotic. The steakhouse closed for the night, and employees were interviewed by investigators before being sent home in shock. Management later installed additional signage and barriers to the kitchen entrance, citing safety concerns. Local news covered the incident briefly, framing it as a workplace hazard rather than focusing on Barbara herself. Among staff, the story circulated quietly for months, an unsettling reminder that a single act of arrogance had ended in a scene they would not forget. It was August 22nd, 2015, near Sacramento, California. A group of office workers gathered at a bungee jumping site built over the American River, the late summer air dry and still. It was meant to be a team-building retreat, the type of event companies use to break down barriers among employees. Instead, it became the scene of a violent death that could have been avoided. Cynthia Walker was 45 years old and worked in mid-level administration at a financial services firm. Colleagues described her as outspoken and controlling, quick to humiliate others in meetings. She often mocked co-workers for hesitating or second-guessing themselves, equating caution with weakness. Outside of work, she carried that same attitude into daily life, frequently berating store clerks and waitstaff. She seemed to thrive on being the loudest presence in the room and sought every opportunity to assert dominance. Bungee jumping had been chosen for the retreat because it was thrilling but safe when procedures were followed. Operators used heavy-duty harnesses, double-checked buckles, and attached each participant's tether to a reinforced steel rig secured above the bridge platform. The jump itself was about 160 feet, with the rope designed to stretch safely while avoiding contact with the rocks and river below. Staff emphasized that every step of the setup mattered. A jumper who ignored instructions or disrupted the process could put themselves in immediate danger. When it was Cynthia's turn, the risks increased, not because of the activity itself, but because of her behavior. She had already ridiculed one coworker for his hesitation, calling him spineless in front of the group. Her mocking laughter carried across the platform, making others uncomfortable. When the staff member began explaining the safety briefing, she waved him off, insisting she didn't need to be lectured. He attempted to guide her through the final harness check, but she brushed past his instructions. Several witnesses later recalled the growing tension. The operator tried to tighten a secondary buckle, but Cynthia turned away from him. She positioned herself on the edge of the platform, ignoring the fact that her tether had not yet been fully straightened and secured. The staff shouted for her to wait, but she smirked and jumped before the all-clear was given. The accident unfolded in seconds. Because she jumped before the tether was fully straightened, it tightened with a twist, snapping taut at an angle. The uneven pull swung her violently to the side, slamming her body against one of the bridge's concrete supports. The operators scrambled to reach her, rappelling down quickly, but her injuries were catastrophic. She had sustained massive blunt force trauma from the collision with the bridge and multiple fractures from the fall into the rocks. By the time they reached her, she showed no signs of life. Emergency responders were called by the workers, arriving within 15 minutes, but she was pronounced dead at the scene. Her funeral was sparsely attended, held at a small chapel in her hometown. Relatives spoke in muted tones, avoiding the subject of how the accident happened. Some remembered her as strong-willed, while others admitted privately that her temper often pushed people away. A cousin noted the absence of many co-workers, saying it felt as if the tragedy had closed a chapter no one wished to revisit. Instead of a collective outpouring of grief, the service carried an air of uneasy silence. It was November 19, 2016 in Chicago, Illinois. Holiday shoppers filled the mall, weaving in and out of crowded corridors while the escalators carried people between levels. What began as another Saturday of commerce would end in an accident so sudden and preventable that witnesses struggled to comprehend what they had just seen. Sharon McMillan, 50, was a longtime resident of the city who had built a reputation for being combative in public. She worked as a claims processor for an insurance firm, where co-workers described her as domineering and impatient. Away from work, her interactions were similar. Mall staff knew her as someone who pushed boundaries, demanding discounts or threatening complaints when things did not go her way. Her personality thrived on confrontation, which often escalated to shouting matches over trivial issues. Her neighbors said that risk for Sharon was not physical in the traditional sense, but social. She wielded it to exert control and to humiliate others. That afternoon, Sharon visited a kiosk to argue over a return, claiming the employee was intentionally stalling her. Witnesses later recounted how she berated the worker, drawing attention from shoppers nearby. Security was alerted, but before officers arrived, Sharon stormed away, muttering insults as she pushed through the crowd. Her frustration had not cooled, and she was visibly flustered as she approached the nearest escalator. Escalators are engineered to move thousands of people per day without issue, provided riders follow posted rules. Guardrails, comb plates, and overhead signs are standard safety measures. Still, accidents occur when people ignore the stability required on a moving staircase. Sharon, dismissive of such cautions, treated the mall as another arena to assert herself, oblivious to how quickly her actions could translate into physical danger. The area was packed with shoppers carrying bags. Multiple people urged caution as the flow of traffic narrowed onto the escalator entry. Sharon ignored them, shoving past a young couple and elbowing her way onto the moving steps. At that moment, another shopper jostled against her. Sharon, already leaning forward aggressively, lost her balance. The fall unfolded in seconds. She pitched over the thin metal rail, her arms flailing as startled screams echoed from below. Shoppers reached instinctively, but no one was close enough to grab her. She tumbled nearly 2 stories, her body striking a lower ledge before landing headfirst on the tile floor. The impact was loud, described by witnesses as a sickening thud. Shattered shopping bags and stunned children added to the chaos as people scrambled away from the scene. Others called 911. Security officers arrived within moments, finding Sharon motionless. Blood pooled rapidly beneath her head, and her chest showed no movement. Attempts at CPR were futile, her injuries far too severe. Medical responders confirmed her death minutes later, with catastrophic cranial trauma as the cause. In the hours after the fall, the mall partly shut down as shaken shoppers abandoned purchases and left in silence. Parents hurried children past the cordoned area, and nearby employees admitted the sound of her body hitting the floor stayed with them. One cashier even quit days later, unable to face the escalators again. Without official statements, the memory spread through personal retellings, with witnesses saying ordinary noises, rustling bags, voices. The escalator's hum triggered flashbacks, leaving the mall permanently marked by the image of a woman whose recklessness finally caught up with her. It was July 2nd, 2018 in Miami, Florida. The condo pool area was crowded with families. Children splashed in the shallow end while parents chatted from lounge chairs. Within an hour, this ordinary afternoon would leave the community stunned, witnesses replaying in their minds how one reckless moment turned fatal. Teresa Howard, 48, lived in the building and was known among residents for her confrontational behavior. She worked in real estate, a career that rewarded her bluntness, but also fueled a habit of belittling those around her. Neighbors described her as quick-tempered, often escalating minor issues into public scenes. Her motivation was less about preserving order and more about asserting control. She treated risk casually, assuming rules and precautions applied to others rather than herself. That afternoon, Teresa became enraged at a group of children laughing and splashing near the shallow end. She accused their mother of letting them disrupt the pool and launched into a loud tirade. The condo pool was maintained according to code, with lifeguards on duty, posted rules, and anti-slip surfacing around the deck. Still, wet pavement and running children created predictable hazards. Lifeguards emphasized caution, reminding adults and children alike about the risks of slick tiles and unguarded edges. Teresa ignored such warnings. Eyewitnesses later reported she stood over the water, pointing aggressively and shouting insults. The children retreated, frightened, while other residents turned away in discomfort. A lifeguard approached to calm the situation, but Teresa's voice only rose as she gestured toward the children, demanding they leave. The tension escalated until Teresa abruptly turned to storm off. Her sandals skidded on the wet deck, the water she had been standing near spreading across the tiles. Witnesses saw her lose her footing, her arms flailing as she toppled backward. The back of her head struck the pool's concrete edge with a sharp crack that echoed across the deck. In the same motion, her body rolled lifelessly into the shallow water. Two lifeguards dove in immediately, pulling Teresa's unconscious body to the surface. Blood from the head wound mixed with the pool water, leaving no doubt about the severity of the injury. CPR was started on the deck as residents gathered in shock. Despite repeated compressions and rescue breaths, Teresa never regained consciousness. Emergency responders called by the lifeguards confirmed her death within minutes of arrival, citing blunt force trauma. In the days that followed, conversations in the condo lobby and mailroom carried less sympathy than blunt honesty. Residents described the scene again and again, but almost always with the same refrain, that Teresa had finally pushed too far, and this time her own stubbornness had caught up with her. Parents admitted they felt relief that their children would no longer be targets of her shouting. It was June 11, 2016, in Denver, Colorado. The off-leash dog park was buzzing with activity, dogs sprinting across dirt fields while their owners called out commands from the shade. Beneath the surface of the ordinary weekend scene, tension was brewing, and by the end of the morning, a single reckless confrontation would leave the park stunned and a life cut short. Elaine Roberts, 47, was a longtime resident of the neighborhood. She worked part-time as a bookkeeper and was known more for her constant complaints than her professional reputation. Neighbors often avoided her because of her habit of confronting people over minor issues. Trash left outside, loud music, or the way they walked their pets. She carried that same confrontational approach into the dog park, where she repeatedly berated owners she viewed as careless. The park itself was structured for mixed use. Wide open dirt areas for running, a pond for swimming, and clear signage noting that dogs would be off-leash inside the perimeter. Owners were expected to monitor their pets closely and intervene if aggression surfaced. Large breeds often played alongside small ones without incident, but conflicts required calm handling and distance. The environment was safe when people respected its dynamics, but those who ignored the unpredictability of animals introduced unnecessary danger. That morning, Elaine brought her terrier to the park and quickly grew irritated when a large German shepherd ran near her dog. Witnesses later said the shepherd showed no overt aggression, but Elaine interpreted its curiosity as a threat. She shouted across the field that the dog should be leashed, drawing unwanted attention. The owner called the shepherd back, but Elaine continued yelling, waving her arms and accusing him of endangering others. When nearby owners asked her to calm down, she refused, striding forward and pointing directly at the shepherd while demanding it be put down. Her movements escalated the situation. She leaned toward the animal, jabbing her finger in its direction. The shepherd, startled by her sudden lunge, reacted defensively. Its owner grabbed the collar, but before full restraint could be applied, the dog lunged forward. Elaine extended her hand in an attempt to push it back, which placed her forearm directly in line with its jaws. The shepherd clamped down hard, crushing and tearing tissue in one violent motion. The park fell into chaos. Multiple people rushed in, one striking the dog with a jacket, another prying at its mouth using an emergency wedge technique. The shepherd was pulled off within seconds, but the damage was catastrophic. Elaine collapsed backward onto the dirt, clutching her right forearm as bright red arterial blood sprayed from the wound. Witnesses described the volume as overwhelming, pooling rapidly on the ground. Several owners acted quickly. A bystander pressed a towel firmly against the wound while another screamed for someone to call 911. The towel was soaked instantly, and Elaine's face grew pale as her body slumped. When direct pressure failed to stop the bleeding, one man removed his belt and improvised a tourniquet, cinching it tightly above the wound on her upper forearm. For several minutes, they tried to keep her conscious, but her breathing became shallow. Paramedics arrived within 8 minutes. They replaced the makeshift tourniquet with a medical-grade one and began fluid resuscitation. Elaine was rushed to a trauma center, but the brachial artery had been completely severed. Despite surgical attempts to repair the damage and massive transfusions, the blood loss had pushed her into irreversible shock. She was pronounced dead within hours of arrival. Animal control placed the German Shepherd under mandatory quarantine, testing it for rabies and reviewing eyewitness accounts. The investigation concluded the dog had been provoked and was not inherently dangerous. The animal was released back to its owner after the holding period. Her funeral was held privately. Neighbors acknowledged her combative reputation, but expressed disbelief that such behavior could end in death. Thanks for watching. If this compilation of fatal arrogance and hostility entertained you, click here for more.